Hi, my name is Ann B. Brady, and I will be talking about my book, New Beginning, the story of my adoption, life, and services. I want to discuss some more things about my adoption. First thing I want to talk about is the fact that in the beginning of my book, yes, I go from stating where and when I was born to the fact to my living with my adopted parents on a temporary basis and then being adopted. And part of that is because in the beginning, I didn't know anything or really remember anything of my life before adoption. So I wanted to make sure that if I talked about the adoption, it would be when I first started searching in 1980. When I was in service with my two sons and my husband, and I wanted to make sure there was that distinction because I learned a lot of things about my mother and my brother and my family and my situation as a child and what I went through in my adoption file that I got from social services. And the other thing I wanted to do was I wanted to read a poem that I wrote when I found my birth brother. And this will explain to you how I felt about finding my birth brother. Okay, here it is. Found. I discovered that I had a brother, and so the search began. There was a mixture of feelings: happiness, nervousness, and anticipation. As the years dragged on, at times there was also frustration. Then came the call. My brother was found. As I called him, I felt happy, nervous, and a little scared. How would he feel? Happy or angry? Did he know about me? Would he care? At first he was skeptical and wary, afraid it might be a bad joke. It's hard to explain the feelings we have about the past and now. But for now, we will write and talk to each other, hoping to someday meet. And that basically describes how I felt about my birth brother. And the other thing I want to talk about is the rules and regulations for the states. Now, when I first started searching in Massachusetts, they had a law that you had to get approval from a probate judge in order to get your original birth certificate. And you had to give them a reason why and hope that they said yes. But of course, the rules and regulations in Massachusetts concerning adoption and searching and adoptee searching have changed over the years. Now, Massachusetts, the age to get for an adoptee to actually search for birth parents or birth family, including siblings and father, is 18. Can you get your original birth certificate? Yes. As far as non identifying information, the information has to be through court order or permission of the birth parent. And this is a list that's compiled by the Adoptee Rights Law Center. And they have on their website a list of all 50 states and Washington, D.C. of what age you have to be to get your birth certificate, original birth certificate, how you are you able to get your original birth certificate, and also whether you can get your adoption file, and if you will be given non-identifying information in your file or identifying information in your file. Non-ID information is basically saying we will redact certain things in the file, so you may know the first name of your birth mother or your birth father or siblings, but we won't tell you the last name. We'll white out part of the birth date. Sometimes they're consistent, sometimes they aren't. And sometimes, if you look hard enough, you can read and find out what you need to know. I won't be more specific than that because I don't want the agencies to go ahead and white out the whole thing so that nobody can find anything. There are some states that will, and there are only like I think one or two, that if the birth parent does not want you to search for them, they can tell Family Social Services, don't give them any information. Don't tell them who we are. And there's one state where it occurs or is applicable to even after they die. You cannot get that information. Like I said, if you go to Adoptee Right Law Center on the website, and at the bottom of each page that I compiled of the states in Washington, D.C., is the website for the Adoptee Right Law Center. And if you go to that website, there is a section there where it says state, and you pick whatever state you're looking for, and it'll tell you what the most recent laws, because there have been states where it was okay to search and they gave you all the information, and now they don't. And others where they restricted it really bad, and now you have more leeway. Uh, Another reason that adoptees search is not just to find birth family or where they came from, who their family is. Some of them aren't interested in that until they have an illness that the doctors can't figure out what they have. And so they may try to contact the birth family to find out if there's any medical history of that kind of disease or that have the symptoms they have. So, like if someone has Parkinson's, and the doctors, because a lot of diseases have the same symptoms, and it's hard sometimes to pin it down. Even if you are a doctor and know what you're doing, uh, sometimes it's hard to pin down what is going on with you. They run tests and nothing seems to come up. And if you can contact a birth mother or birth father or a sibling and find out, yeah, people have died from a heart attack, died from cancer, we have a history of Parkinson's, sickle cell anemia, that kind of thing, and even Tay-Sachs. And you don't know this because you don't have access to your files. And you grow up not knowing your medical history. And that's the biggest difference between, to me anyway, between adoptees and people who were born into their family. And also people who were in the system, either in foster homes and or orphanages like my brother was, and were never adopted. The thing is, I've heard this from numerous people, and at one time my husband said the same thing, and I had to explain to him, and that's just not true. Is, well, you have the medical history of your adoptive family. Well, unless a relative of your birth parents, either mother or father, is related to you or is related to them, then no, you don't have a medical history at all. What you have, because you weren't born to them, you don't have a genetic DNA connection. They are not family in a DNA sense. They're in a family in a loving and nurturing sense. But so, and I can explain it this way: say a white couple adopts a black child or Chinese child. Well, the fact that they're adopted is obvious, or a black family adopts a white child. The child is automatically going to know that, grow up knowing that they're adopted, even if they were adopted as an infant. And if someone has a child of a different race or ethnicity, such as the Chinese, black, white, and it's different than the family, obviously they don't have the same genetics. Well, it's the same thing with white people that adopt white kids, and black people adopt black kids, and Chinese adopt Chinese kids. They don't have the genetic connection unless they're a family member of one of the birth parents. And that's important to remember. I found out, now this wasn't in my file, my records, and so I don't know if they knew or not, but I have Fuchs dystrophy. It's Fuch apostrophe S dystrophy. And what it is an eye condition, and it's inherited from the mother. And I found out about this when I was about 35, 36 years old. Uh, what it is the cornea starts losing cells. And when it does that, fluid builds up from the atmosphere and everything, builds up in the eyes, and the eyes start to swell a little bit. And I was told by doctors in the military, in the Army, to take, or one doctor anyway, to take a blow dryer, put it on low, and blow it directly into my eyes. And I was like, say what? I don't like anything blowing in my eyes. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. But anyway, eventually the cells from the cornea will be lost so much that you go blind. Now, there is a cure. And it's even better now than it was when my mother was alive. Okay? Because with Fuchs dystrophy, you can get a partial corneal transplant. And so you can get one, and then when the other eye starts to go, and they watch you, and you have to go every 6 months and a year, and they'll keep an eye on that and tell you when you need to have the surgery. And it takes about a week or so because you have to let the eye, the cornea, attach itself to the rest of the cornea. And you have to be, I'm on eye drops, prednisone eye drops for the rest of my life. Fortunately, now when you start out, after you have the surgery, you have to do every day. And then eventually, once it takes, and then you can wean off of that, and you still have to have it done every 3 days. So it's usually Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I have to do eye drops. But that's something that wasn't in the file. Now, I did find other things, and I know my mother died of a heart attack. She died at 60. She had died in 1980. I had started searching in 1990. But I do know that most of my family, from genealogy and everything else, that most of them died of heart disease, but it's not like they died if they were 50 or 60. they died at 80, 90 years old. So I figured that's more, it's not really heart disease as much as old age. And so you have to consider factors like that because that will tell you, God forbid you don't get some really sick disease that that you're going to die earlier than you normally would. But so I should live a fairly long life, even with the COPD, as I've got it under control. And so the other thing I wanted to discuss was the fact that growing up, I had friends and, one lifelong friend who we shared a lot of adventures and everything, and it's in my book. But when I went to college, I dropped out of nursing. I started as a nursing student, and I started going to summer school because I wanted to make sure that once I started going to the hospital, I wasn't going to fall down on my other studies, because I had a certain amount of courses I need to take. And fortunately, I had leeway as far as the optional courses. Well, not necessarily optional, but one of the things I had to do is take at least one course in college for gym. And after my experience in high school with gym and the girls I had to deal with when I was on their team, I wasn't looking forward to gym. But I discovered my school had scuba diving. So I took scuba diving in college. Uh, we practiced and swam and dived in the swimming pool. It was an indoor swimming pool at the college. And so that's where we did our diving and everything. But we also had a lecture part where we had a book on scuba diving. Tell us the pitfalls, to explain, partial oxygen, nitrogen narcosis, or the bends, uh, how not to go down too deep, and how not to ascend too fast. And so that was very informative. I also I had to take a history or geography course. I decided to take anthropology because history courses I've taken in high school and they can be kind of dull and dry. Anthropology, we got to see movies and talk about the cultures of different people in different areas of the world. We watched The Nook of the North to talk about the lifestyle. It was a documentary back in the 1950s about an Eskimo or Inuit up in Alaska, and the guy that went up there, the reporter that was investigating their lifestyle and everything, and he was in the documentary and narrating the documentary. The other the other one was the Holy Ghost people up in Appalachia. They handle snakes. They drink arsenic. Uh, and so it talked about that, which was interesting. So I also took marine biology once I switched majors from nursing to biology, medical technology, because I needed another course in biology. And so my counselor was upset with me because he hated marine biology. But I took marine biology during the summer and I had a blast. I learned a lot. We did a lot of field trips, everything like that. And when I graduated, that was awesome. I graduated in 4.5 years because I went to summer school and I had switched majors in my third year of nursing school. But there were some teachers hellbound on pushing me out of the program, and I've acquiesced because I figured if they were that help. Well, what decided for me was one of the teachers who taught psychology of nursing, and she told me that she thought that I was not wanting to get out of nursing because I thought I'd fall apart if I didn't have it. And I said, fine, I'm gone. And then they tried to talk me back, tell me I could come back, but that was only because my mother came with me when I went to sign out of the nursing courses, and said, well, you could stay if you wanted to. It's like, you've already, and I said, no. I mean, my thinking was, you've already told me you don't want me here, so why would I stay? And I took microbiology all over again because in nursing, microbiology is half a course, half a year, a semester, where regular microbiology is a whole year course. And while I was a nursing student, I had missed science. I really love science. And you don't get much of that in nursing. I mean, you get a smattering, you get a year of general chemistry, a semester of microbiology. Now, it may have changed since I was in there, but they just get a smattering of science so that they know what people are talking about when they talk to them and stuff. And I've gotten to see quite a few concerts. You know, Elvis Presley, Teresa Brewer, which is from my parents. I went with them to see that. Their age group. Uh, I've seen old Elvis and Grateful Dead and Deep Purple. I've seen Elton John. I've seen REO Speedwagon. And we've also seen, with my husband, Celtic Woman. We watched it first on PBS, and when they came to Montgomery, we decided to see it. But that's the other thing to discuss. When I decided to look for a job, and the reason I decided to go into the military was because I didn't want to spend my life living at home. I wanted to find a job so I could earn enough money to live my own and make my own way. Uh, my mom told me, well, we could put in a word for you at one of the hospitals. We know people, and you could get the job. And I said, I don't want that because I'm not getting it on my credentials. I'm getting it because you're getting it for me. And she said, well, you would be getting it like that, but you'd have to really work and earn it in order to keep it. And it's like, And I wanted to be on my own and independent, and I was an adult. A child can only live, at least in my mind, at home so long before they have to fly, take wing and fly away from the nest. And you have to be reliant on yourself. Otherwise, you never learn about the world or get experience and find new things to do and everything else. You're always at home. And yeah, I could have gone out all the time and everything else, being at home, but I wanted more than that. And so eventually I decided to join the Army. I had put in an application to work for Revlon, never heard back from them. So I said, the military. I looked at the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines. Marines don't have anything in medical, so I looked at the Air Force. They said, we're not taking anybody, and We had a guy that had a 4.0 average in college, and we turned him down the first time he applied. So I looked at the Navy. Navy has medical, and they had, research and hospital positions, but they didn't allow women on ships. And I figured if I'm going to join the Navy, I want to be on a ship. Otherwise, what's the sense of being in the Navy? It's about being on a ship, going on the seven seas to work. And so I settled on the Army. And I entered the delayed entry program. I got 130 on the general test or GT score for the Army. And they grade you on each subject matter, whether it's writing, mechanics, and so forth, English, and science. And I got the minimum requirement for science to get into a science occupation or MLS is 90. I got 110, which I was surprised at. But so I joined the Army, took basic at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and I was interviewed for a job by the head of Department USADR, United States Army Institute of Dental Research. And he interviewed me. I had hoped for more interviews than just one place. And we talked, and I discussed what I'd done, what I wanted to do. And he told me what the job was, and I told him I was interested. And so basically, he accepted me, and I had to, recruiter called me and says, well, he wants you. And so I thought about I said, give me some time to think about it. He said, well, hurry up because it won't last forever. And so I talked with my family about it and thought about it. And then, my brother said, well, you should go into the officer school. And I talked to a recruiter about that. And he said, why don't you think about that after you graduate basic training? So I went ahead and enlisted and then was re-enlisted again for the final time at Brooklyn. And I used to have a picture of me with everybody else that I had got sworn in. I was the only woman, and I was also the shortest one there. I looked like a midget amongst giants. But basic training was hard, and I had problems with bronchitis and everything else. And part of it was I smoked, and and I stopped smoking for a while I was in basic training, and I got better. So I tried to keep from smoking, and I graduated. As hard as it was, I graduated from basic training and then went to home and then for leave and then went to Walter Reed. I have no regrets about joining the Army. It, like everything else, is good and bad. Plus, to me, it's a model for how, in the civilian world, pay should be given equally among everyone. So, and when I say that, what I mean is me as a private first class received a certain pay, and I had maybe months experience, but I got paid for that. How long I was in determined, and my rank determined what I got paid. The fact that I was a woman didn't matter because someone else who was the same pay grade in the same time in service, who is male, would get paid exactly the same. Now, if he was in combat field, he would get hazardous duty pay or combat pay, or if you went overseas, you get overseas pay, that kind of thing. But that was extra aside from your regular pay. Plus, we got to live. If we lived on base, we got to eat at the mess hall free. And if we had, they gave us, if they paid us for meals, you got paid a certain amount and you could go anywhere you wanted off post. And if you decide to eat in the mess hall, then you would pay for your meal at the hospital. But basically, without the added incentives and extras, your pay, whether you're male or female, was the same for the same grade and the same amount of time in service. And it's the same basically in the federal workers, with federal workers. They get paid the same for the amount of time they're in and the pay grade that they are, whether they're male or female. It doesn't matter. And I think that should be even in the civilian world. I mean, to me, it makes sense that way. But I want to wish everybody a happy weekend. I hope you have a great Sunday and looking forward to the next week. And thank you for listening to me. And I hope you buy my book, A New Beginning: The Story of My Adoption, Life, and Service.